Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Green. I'm the Program Director of Meth ID and Data, and welcome to this Meth webinar. The title is Agentic and Authentic, How Can We Assign Reliable IDs to Millions of Bots? So what's it all about? Well, I think the best way to describe it is to read the description that I wrote for this webinar, because it's beautifully written. I say so myself. So the bot invasion is coming. Major AI platforms are all making it possible for users to create their own virtual agents that search, chat, shop, and more in digital spaces. But this raises considerable challenges, such as how do we link agent IDs to human owners? How should users authenticate their agents? And how can users set parameters for what agents can and can't do? So we've been thinking about this topic at Meth for some weeks now. And in fact, we're just about to publish a positioning paper on the topic. We don't have all the answers, but we try and lay out some of the big questions and possible solutions. And so we wanted to go further and discuss this in a webinar. And I'm delighted that two Meth experts have agreed to join us. And they are Gautam Hazari, he's the Chief Product and Innovation Officer for XConnect, and Piers Gorman, who's a distinguished member of the technical staff at Numerical. So thank you both for joining us very much.
Thank you.
Let's kick off with some descriptions. I mean, I imagine there's people watching this, some are going to know a lot about this, some won't know too much. So let's start with definitions. When we were preparing for this, I think, Piers, you had a quote from a lawyer. I hope you got it to hand because it was quite a useful kickoff point. He's now rummaging around his desk trying to find it, but I think, yeah, he's got it. So tell us about that, and I think that can provide a good start point for us.
Okay, yeah, this is a quote I used in a presentation I gave at the SIP Network Operators Conference in September, and I lied to the audience and said that this quote was issued by Barack Obama in front of the United Nations. But then I told him the truth because, you know, it's all about identity. This came from a friend of mine and a coworker, Keith Buell, and he's the general counsel at Numerical, and I'm going to give the background that he developed this on a walk with his dog on a trail. He was thinking about this, and it's an imperative. And what he said was, every entity on Earth and every person on the planet should know with certainty with whom they are communicating electronically. And I love this so much because he starts out every entity. Well, entity can be an AI agent, right? It doesn't just have to be a person. But he says every entity on Earth and every person on the planet, right? So he's covering every possibility of identity that's going to matter to somebody who's being communicated with.
Mm. Well, it's interesting he was walking his dog, because there used to be that phrase, didn't there, in the early days of the internet? On the internet, no one knows you're a dog.
That's right.
So maybe his dog wrote it. But now, of course, you know, we've extended to beyond living organisms to non-human entities, as they're called. Gautam, do you want to have a go at describing what agentic AI is? Because it's obviously different from, you know, machine learning and large language models and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so before defining agentic AI, there are two different words here, agentic and AI. So AI has gone through transformation, right? AI is, in one of the talks that I was giving in October, I asked the audience, so there are 3 A's: apps, APIs, and AI. Which one do you think is the oldest, right? And interestingly, 80% of the audience said AI, and it's correct. And that's what is the truth, because the word AI was coined in 1956 in the famous Dartmouth workshop, right? And the AI algorithm, so the most kind of popular algorithm, that's why we see all the advancement now, is due to the neural network or the deep neural network and the backpropagation algorithm, which is basically an implementation of Leibniz chain rule from 1676, right? It's that old.
Right.
So anyways, so AI has gone through a transformation from predictive AI, because previously we were doing prediction. Is it a cat or a dog? Is it, you know, what will be the house price? What will be the stock price? To generative AI, through that thing that happened almost 3 years back, isn't it? In 30th November 2022, the ChatGPT movement. And from generative, interestingly, you know, what I was talking about, predictive AI, which is, hey, there is an image, is it a cat or a dog? That changed from predictive AI. When it became generative AI, the entire narrative changed. So instead of an image, hey, it is cat or a dog, you ask the AI model, hey, create a cat or create a dog, and it generates it. So it's a 180 degrees flip, right? Then generative AI moved into agentic AI. The word agentic again came from psychology. So Albert Bandura's book from 1986, right? So the way I describe this is not just pure autonomy, right, or automation, because that's where I think there is still is a lot of debate and confusion there. That we have been doing automation for quite long. It's not automation. It's agentic automation, which means the components, that thing, whatever that is. I mean, sometimes we call it a digital species as well. This digital species is having its own agency to decide things. So the way I describe this is with 5 models. I actually said this in a book that I published 2 weeks back, Internet of Agents. So it's model, it's multi-stage planning, it's memory, it's machine usage, and it's mindful AI. So an agentic AI, it's not just one single component, right? It has a model, which is where it derived it from, the generative AI, the large language models, etc. It actually needs and can do multi-stage planning. It can plan its action. It can plan its goal. You don't need to give it a detailed goal like what used to happen in automation. Then it needs to have some sort of memory so that it can remember the context, what it was doing, why it's doing, what it needs to get to. Then it needs to be, and this is where probably we'll discuss a bit more, because a lot of things happening is machine usage or tools usage, where some technologies we'll talk about later are coming in. And there is something significant had happened just 2 days back. We'll talk about that as well. And then the most important thing is mindfulness, which is this all ethical aspects around that, right? I call it the ethical firewall that needs to be there around that, right? So that's what this agentic AI system or the AI agent is, where it can actually take lots of actions based on the high level goal that we give.
Fantastic. Okay, so it's a big advance on what we've seen before. I suppose what we really need to establish is where it's at now, because is this vaporware? Is it real? I mean, Pierce, do you have any thoughts on where this technology is at in terms of how widely it's been implemented and that kind of thing?
Agentic AI? Nope.
Yeah.
I'm not a good person to answer that question.
Gotham, you've just written a book on it. I mean, we tend to think about agentic AI at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, as a kind of an enterprise thing. So, enterprises that are maybe telling agents to take a call from a customer service, from a customer, assign it to a certain agent, translate into another language, log it in a system. Is this correct? Is it mostly an enterprise thing at the moment, or how developed is the consumer-facing side of it?
It's not just enterprise. It's in the consumer space as well, although we have not seen, all of us having our personal agent we are carrying with us, but it's a matter of time, right? So, and I think the transition that we are moving towards is what sort of form these agents will take. What do I mean by that? Will there be an application sitting on my phone acting as an agent? Will there be one application acting as agent across all the different digital touchpoints that I have? So in that case, why do we need an app store, right? We are in that transition phase, and there are other attempts that has happened as well, which are real, right? And they started to happen 2 years back. So in 2023, during CES, there were 2 devices which were launched. One was what was known as the AI pin. So instead of having application sitting on my mobile phone acting as an agent, this was the AI pin created by, I believe, the designer of iPhone. It didn't work that well due to commercial reasons. The other device was Rabbit R1, which I pre-ordered as soon as it came out, and I have played with it, and I can actually, with certainty, it doesn't look that great, right? It's orange, it's a bit clunky. You can put it in your pocket, But that's a real example of what a consumer AI agent is and will be, right? And that's 2023 it started, right? Although not all of us are carrying in. So what does that mean, actually, let's say, what it will do for me, right? As a consumer, not in enterprise space is pretty clear, right? What it will do for me is, if you take an example of, let's say, use case, right? So right now, let's say I have an objective of going to my friend's place. If that's my objective as a human, what I'll do is, first thing I'll do is open up my phone, open up, let's say, one of the rideshare app, let's say Uber. I'll click that square button in Uber. I'll type in my friend's address. It will basically figure out the distance, the best route. It will tell me some price. That's the experience right now, right? In those, let's say, agent, whatever device you use, whatever form it takes, you don't need to open up an app because your objective is not opening an app. That's the sub goal, right? So the objective is, I want to go to my friend's place. That's all.
Yeah.
If my friend is called whatever, let's say a show, I'll say, hey, I want to go to a show. If there is in my address book, if there is a, let's say, there are more than one with that name, then it will talk me back. Hey, do you mean that or this? It decides on its own, right? Or it may decide because it's Saturday 5 a.m. and almost every Saturday 5 a.m. I go to that friend's place, then it will decide on its own, right? And then it will decide whether it needs to call Uber or Bolt or something else. Or it may decide, because I am conscious of my ESG goals, in that case, it may decide that my carbon footprint is pathetic for the week. So in that case, don't book Uber or Bolt. Go by a train. So it will say, hey, I have booked a ticket to the train. That's what is real right now, right?
Yeah.
It's not all of us are using it, but it's a matter of time, as we all know. In the enterprise space, it's happening. I would say not in the purely consumer space. I think the most real example, I don't know where it fits, in consumer or in the enterprise space, is all these co-pilots.
Yeah.
They're agentic, right? They're taking decisions on our own, although they're carefully called co-pilots, but they are not co-pilots, they are autopilots. You just give it a task, it will create a complete presentation for you. It can create a complete application set for you and deploy it for you.
Okay, well, I mean, you've raised a lot of interesting points there. We're going to come back to the whole API thing is very interesting, of course. Allow me, because my understanding of the way the market is at the moment is that we have a lot of agents in kind of closed environments. So, you just talked about Copilot. It's mostly kind of like organizing your emails for you or summarizing a meeting for you. It's not really going out there. It's not interacting with other agents. It's not buying things. So it's, the identity question, which we're going to come on to, is perhaps less of a concern there. But before we sort of dive into the identity challenges, Gotham, because I'm just going to come back to you again. Can you just lay out for us the key technical standards that are governing this new space? We have, MCP is probably the most quoted, but there's other, as agent to agent, there's other standards. Briefly, because we could go into the weeds here. Can you just tell us a little bit about what those do?
So again, that's one element of the agentic AI ecosystem, right? And that was the fourth aim I was talking about, is machine usage, right? Agents like us as human species needs to use tools. Without tools, we are not humans, right? So these agents need to use tools as well. And how can they use tools? There are lots of tools available in the digital space. They are digital services, right? They're exposing APIs, they're exposing all sorts of other interfaces, right? The way these agents are supposed to use these tools, which is this machine usage, the fourth thing I was talking about, there was no standard, right? And that was not working. And as the technology evolves, MCP is Model Context Protocol. That was created by Anthropic and open sourced it. That was the first standard. But there are a lot many more as well. A2A from Google, ACP, Agent Control Protocol from Agent Communication Protocol, from IBM as well, right? But I think at some point there will be convergence there. Very interestingly, day before yesterday, Linux Foundation announced, I think they're calling it AAIF, Agentic AI Framework. And then they started to have I don't know what's the exact objective will be, but they are combining MCP, and there is a framework called Goose from, I believe it was from Block, and also the agents.md from OpenAI. So agents.md is, as you know, readme.md is quite popular with developers, where if you need to put something in GitHub or anywhere, so you need to put in how to use those code, right? But that's for human users. If the coder is an agent, they can read it, but it's not that efficient. So OpenAI created agents.md, which is for agents, right? So they started with these three. And I think that's a brilliant start because that's what we need. Otherwise, there will be a huge fragmentation of technology. Like MCP we started with, now we're ending with so many things, right? So that's where it is moving. I don't think we have reached anywhere yet. That's just a start.
So just to summarize, we've got NCP and other protocols that govern how agents interact with each other, interact with systems. We've got Linux, which has just announced what we hope is an initiative to bring these all together, because there's lots of them. Now, as I understand it, they're brilliant technical protocols which do great work of making agentic AI a viable thing. They don't really address the identity question, and obviously this is what we're particularly interested in. So, Piers, do you want to give us your thoughts on what some of these identity challenges are and why it's such an important in this new space?
Now here I can actually make a comment, so that's good. Although I would have been happy to just, you should have just done a Gotham Hazari webinar with him. He's brilliant. It's fun listening. I feel so blessed actually to be able to sit here and listen and learn. It's wonderful. It's been a good day, and Gotham's adding to it. When I say these things, I want to hear Gotham's feedback on it. But I'm going to say that on this agent that we've been talking about, or the agentic AI, it's in my head that an agent lives in a data center or lots of data centers. It's not necessarily something that you could just operate on a phone. Now, my understanding is that the code itself for being able to generate a large language model is not necessarily a large amount of information. And for all I know, it might be able to be stored on a mobile phone. But then all of the data that it needs to be able to work with, could it just work from the mobile phone? So my concept is agentic AI represents code that's running in data centers somewhere. And now, how do you assign an identity to the code, or does it create like little identity modules? There's a lot of things to have to think through about what does an identity look like. And then the other thing is the identity I'm going to say is going to be associated with an organization. So it's OpenAI, or it's Google, or it's whoever's going to be operating. Can't remember who Grok belongs to. But anyway, it's going to be the organization that has created the resources, the code, and managing it, maintaining it, operating it. So I would think on the face of it that agent should probably look like an identity that's associated with the provider of it. But that may be too simplistic, because maybe the agent that you had on your phone, a little orange device, maybe that's actually using resources from multiples. So, and then I asked ChatGPT what were challenges for agentic AI identity. And one of the comments that it made, that's just a nice, brilliant, simple comment, was whatever system that you would choose, it's going to have to deal with the fact that you'll have billions of agents. And that's a lot of identities to try and keep track of, or to do with. And then the last thing is those of us who've worked in digital identity in one way or another, the thing that you learn pretty quickly is it's good to have a digital identity, an identifier that represents an entity, but that doesn't actually tell you whether that entity is a trustworthy identity. So communications, you really only want to communicate with things that that you can trust. And so anonymous communications are going to happen. How do you make sure that those anonymous communications can be a trusted communication? When I say anonymous, it doesn't mean that you didn't know the identity associated with a communication attempt. It means, what do you know about that entity, or what can you learn about that entity that allows you to trust that communication attempt? When you're talking about, communications between pieces of code, hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many pieces of code, is your agent going to say, hey, I've been working with these agents over here and they don't seem to have the right. They don't seem to have the right artifacts, credentials, and policies in place for me to be able to trust them. I don't know how this is going to work, because the agent needs to be working on your behalf. It is automated, just as Gotham has said. This is a whole new world. There's a lot of things to have to think through. There'll be some spectacular examples of failures, but hopefully in the end, it's all really a very successful thing. I think it will be. I think this is groundbreaking work, and it's really interesting time.
Gotham, do you want to add what you think the main identity challenges are here? Although we could probably list 20 or 30, but
yeah, I don't think we even know all the challenges right now. But as PS was, highlighting all the issues, I completely agree to those. And then I think one thing we need to realize here is this is not the first time when we are having, let's say, code representing us, right? So when I say us, it's us as humans, us as legal entity, us as organizations as well. That has been there, right? When we interact with a digital service, we interact with the representation of the organization in the digital world, right? That's a piece of code.
Yeah.
IoT. So that's a piece of code, hardware sitting somewhere, representing us in a way, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not just talking about machine identity here, because we have several standards here, right? We know how to solve those. We have standards like OAuth, right, that can work with a human, without a human as well. And they're well established. We know how to do those. We know how to identify the code which is interacting on behalf of me, or it needs to put me as a human in the loop as well, right? So there is two-legged OAuth, there is three-legged OAuth. Three-legged OAuth is where the human as me needs to be in the loop, so it will ask me or it will involve me. And the two-leg is where it doesn't need to involve me because I have delegated everything in there, right? So those problems are, yes, they were problems, but we have solved those. What we are talking about here, as PS was highlighting, is this is a piece of code either sitting in the cloud, in the data center, or in this piece of orange hardware that I was talking about, or in my phone, or in many other devices that we will see in the future. Even the devices that we use now, in my glass, in my watch, bracelet, who knows what, right? The difference now is this is not just a piece of code representing me. This is a piece of code in a hardware who is going to take decisions on behalf of me, which I may or may not have control, and will be doing actions on behalf of me, which may or may not have control from my side, right? And then identity becomes extremely critical because there are layered identity now. One is an identity associated with that agent, that piece of code in a hardware, but then there's an identity which is human identity associated with me because that is representing me. I think the challenge right now is linking these two, because in the previous world where it's an IoT device, or let's say my Apple Watch, right? That's an IoT device. It has got its identity. There's lots of identity. It has got an IMEI, it has got the SIM has got an IMSI, etc. My phone is exactly the same, right? But they were under our control. It will do exactly how it is programmed to. The agents are not. Agents will take actions and decisions which will have an impact on me, society, everywhere. But I may or may not have direct control, right? So in that case, how do we actually link my human identity to it? That basically is a challenge. Yes, there are lots of thoughts that we can have, but I don't think we have even identified or asked all the questions that we should and we will be.
Yeah, it's interesting that although we're really at the beginning of this, we're already seeing some of the issues coming to bear. I don't know if you're aware of the Amazon and Perplexity legal tussle, but Amazon have taken legal action against Perplexity, which is sending agents to its website. This seems to be all about Amazon needing to know who its customers are and being outraged that it doesn't really know who these Perplexity agents are. Perplexity is saying, well, it's irrelevant. We're a customer. You shouldn't be having to worry about who we are. And this is almost like a test case for some of the things we're talking about. And yet we're really just at the foothills of this this topic. So we can all track that one. That's going to be very, very interesting. But I think, having worked on this Agentic paper for the last few weeks, we can summarize some of the identity challenges as which human does this agent represent? Which tasks is it allowed to perform? How can it authenticate itself when there's no human UI? I'm sure we're going to come back to this, but everything we do on the internet is we authenticate ourselves by typing something or having a photo taken, and agents don't do any of those things. So we need to think about that. We need to think about the audit trail for logging everything that these agents do. We need to think about the legal status, terms and conditions. How do you click a terms and conditions box on an agreement if there's no if your agent doesn't have fingers? So where can we go to get a trusted agent? Is there a directory? If we want to do business with our agents, do business with someone that's trustworthy. How can we revoke an agent's permissions? And on and on and on. So let's talk a little bit about really, I suppose, from a MEF point of view, what we're interested in is how the mobile ecosystem can play its part in solving some of these issues. Now, you guys are both in the authentication space. You're both in using the SIM and the mobile device to verify transactions and so on, and to verify the identity of who's on the other side. Can you give us some thoughts on how the networks and the devices can be key to providing these agents with identities? Gotham, I know you've thought about this.
Yeah, I was going to say, who do you want to start?
I can start, and PS, if you please add in. So let's start with authentication, right? There are lots of other things as well. Let's start with authentication. I think authentication is most interesting in this agentic space because, as Tim, you were highlighting, we created the processes, the technology, the standards with an assumption that this side of a screen, there is a human. That's why we invented password. The human can type in the password. That's why we invented OTP. The human can type in the OTP or speak what OTP is that. The human can, scan his or her face. The human can scan the fingerprint. So there's always a human. That's how we created the authentication ecosystem, right? Although, as I always say, that's not really humanized. We created for the humans, but that's not humanized because authentication is humanized, or any technology is humanized when it becomes invisible for the human. And it's not me, it's Steve Jobs said, right? He said that a technology should either be beautiful or it should be invisible. He was talking about humanization of technology, right? And this is where the mobile ecosystem, the mobile operators has been playing a role, right? Within their own, let's say, internal thing. So SIM, which has been there since 1991, right? I always say and remind myself and everyone else, I in SIM stands for identity. It's subscriber identity module. It was created for one simple reason in 1991, and now as well with eSIM and all sorts of variations, it's doing exactly that, right? Is to identify the person who is holding it, right? Not the the real identity, but we can go down a rabbit hole here. I'm just stopping there. That let's not talk about real identity and stronger identities, but the position factor for authentication, not really identity, without the expectation that the human needs to do something. Human doesn't need to type. Human doesn't need to speak the OTP. Doesn't need to scan their face. So there are processes that we created on that. The industry is moving and then implementing it. Number verify, for example, exactly that, right? Or seamless authentication, which uses the cryptography within the SIM to seamlessly authenticate, where the human user doesn't need to do anything. Still, the authentication happens. Position factor-based authentication, right? Here, there is a bit of synergy because what we were talking about in the authentication space for agentic AI, hey, the human cannot participate because the human is invisible there. Human is a second-grade citizen, unfortunately, in this agentic AI space, right? So in that case, how do we still authenticate? So the mobile ecosystem can play using the SIM. How does it do it? Whether the SIM needs to be somehow attached with the agent or not, that's detail, right? That we can figure out. Or if, let's say, those orange devices may have a SIM, my phone always has a SIM, right? So doesn't matter how this agentic AI or AI agents take shape, whether in my phone or in this additional hardware or in my glasses, doesn't matter. So we have a mechanism to do it, right? So that way, mobile operators can certainly play a role in authentication in this agentic AI space, right? Where we don't need that human to do stuff explicitly. It can happen implicitly. So, that's something that we can do now based on what was happening. There are a lot many other things. Maybe we can talk about that later. PS, I don't know if you want to add something.
Well, I'll say that I think, authentication can mean a lot of things. And when we've talked about it here, where my mind goes is, my background as a telecom engineer was working on StirShaken. And in StirShaken, there are authentication servers and verification servers. And the authentication server is the thing that applies a cryptographic digital signature to the call signaling information that the verification server then can use the same cryptography or use the public key associated with that cryptography to verify the signature on the call and know that whoever signed it, that's authentically the information that they put on there. So authentication in my mind refers to the process of adding a cryptographic signature to something. And but it's like I mentioned earlier, it's one thing to have an authenticated piece of information. It's another thing to know whether or not that authenticated information was authenticated by a criminal or authenticated by a good person or a business that you want to deal with. So the authentication is the first part, but it's the information that you learn that's been authenticated that's going to be important. The identity, the identifier of the identity, that's important, but that's then the attributes associated with that identity or the attestations of attributes. So we talk about trust being transitive. You know that you can trust the website that you attach to because of the trust framework that was established for the X509 security certificates that were issued to the server that you're connecting to. So the authentication is the process of setting up the TLS session with the server, but the trust comes from the domain validation of the company operating the server that you've connected to, and that was done by the certification authority. So authentication to me is a mechanical process, whereas trust and being able to know whether or not it's okay to communicate with that identity is going to be based on electronic attestations of attributes is one of the terms that's used in the European Union Digital Identity Architectural Reference Framework. So identity by itself is only part of what you need when you're talking to an agent. You need to know why it is that you would trust. And then also you mentioned that agents being associated with humans. I think that's too narrow of a scope, because I think a lot of the agents are going to be associated with organizations. I assume that the majority of agents are going to be associated with organizations, whether it's government or commercial, whatever it's going to be.
Sorry.
No, carry on, please.
No, I just wanted to add in there is completely agree, PS. So association of an agent in the enterprise space with, let's say, legal entity, whether it's an organization or not, that's not that complex as associating a human with that, right? So for legal entities, there are artifacts, digital artifacts. You can go through a KYB process, and then there's a certificate, as you said, right? You follow through that certificate chain and you authenticate. For humans, that's quite trickier, right? For humans, we don't always carry along, although there are processes that you can use, right? You always authenticate using an artifact, always authenticate using your passport, your driving license. But that then is not how the internet, the web, and the digital ecosystem works, right? This is why we invented. Yeah. And again, that's that also is using some form of cryptography in there, right? So this is why we invented these mechanisms, because authentication is a challenge. Authentication is challenge because in the digital space, who knows who I am, right? I can, and now it's even more difficult because here you're seeing me as Gautam Hazari. Who knows? It's my digital avatar and agent sitting here,
Yeah.
right? So in that case, authentication is a challenge to prove who I am claiming to be. And this is why I invented all these things, these three different factors, right? Knowledge factor, position factor, and the inherence factor. So anyways, it's an interesting challenge. And I think we are moving towards some solutions, but I would say again, we are not there yet. We are in that journey to solve. And we just talked about the first thing, which is authentication. There are a lot many more things that we need to solve in the identity space.
Awesome. When we've spoken before, you've talked about, when we've been talking about the mobile ecosystem and its potential role here, you've talked about the ability to bring time-sensitive data to the authentication question, not just static data. Could you just expand on that, please? Yeah,
that's actually a bit around authentication, not just authentication. This is that attributes that PS talked about as well. So, and also it is linked to authentication, right? As I was saying that, figuring out if this is a real person interacting in the digital space has always been difficult because the internet was not designed with a human identity layer, as we all know. Otherwise, we all would have IP addresses by now as humans. We don't, until Elon Musk decides that we all should have a chip with an IP address, but we're not there yet, right? So the reality right now in this digital space is we have, so identity is a set of attributes, right? We all have different attributes. And now there are two broad categories of attributes. One attribute which doesn't change that much with time, demographic data, first name, last name, age, date of birth, etc. All sorts of other things, not just here, right? That doesn't change over time, or most of those doesn't change over time, right? Any data which doesn't change over time with this revolution, acceleration, whatever we call with this generative AI, they can be used to train a machine learning model and generate a synthetic identity. That's a big kind of time bomb we are actually sitting in, right? Synthetic identity fraud is super massive, and any static data can be used to generate that, right? If you can train a machine learning model, it can generate that data. Now, on the other hand, as the second category of data I was saying, which is time-sensitive data, which means that the data changes over time. So the data which you process now, and you process the similar data 1 second later, 1 hour later, 1 day later, 1 month later, they will all be different, right? So data which is only relevant for now. And that data becomes extremely valuable in this generative AI space, which is feeding into agentic AI, because those data cannot be used to train a machine learning model, because you cannot, right? Because that data is, if you train it now, it's only relevant today. In 10 seconds later, if you generate something from there, it's not relevant because that data is used. And mobile operators' data, not all of it, majority of it fits in this second category, where majority of the data in this second category from mobile operators are time sensitive. SIM swap data, device swap data, location, although location is sensitive towards privacy, and many of those, right? This data is in this category, which cannot be used to train machine learning model. And if we can create identity frameworks based on this second category of data, right? Because identity is a set of attributes. We just need to focus or prioritize more on this time-sensitive data, where mobile operators can play a brilliant role. They are already playing. In that case, we don't solve all the problem, but we mitigate majority of the risk from synthetic identity. They cannot be generated and they cannot be used to train a machine learning model. Yeah, it's certainly something that I'm sure a lot of operators, well, I hope a lot of mobile operators are thinking about. Similarly, there's the question of compliance and regulation around this space. It's also new now that obviously we don't really have a set of regulations. But Pierce, I know you've worked closely with
you've worked on regulation in the US relating to your work in your previous company before Numerical. Have you got any thoughts on how this might play out, how it should play out, how the regulators should approach this topic, or if they're even thinking about it?
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty of them thinking about it. I think, my experience with regulators is if they know the questions to ask, they'll ask them. And so I think that's where things would start, is they'll start to ask, and the kinds of questions they might ask are, what kinds of questions should we be asking? So no, I'm serious. The regulators are by and large lawyers and attorneys, and they are very good at asking questions, and they use the information that they learn from that to drill down on, which directions they should go. And the other thing about regulators is how should I put this? They try to work with the people that they're regulating, not just against them necessarily. So, I don't think they live to have enforcement requirements to have to deal with. I think they're trying to genuinely assist the industry in doing things in ways that work for the public that they're working for. I don't know what kinds of things that they're already looking at in terms of, the regulators that I've worked most closely with are the Federal Communications Commission.
Yeah.
And insofar as agentic AI would end up having some sort of and it very well could, because of the identity issue specifically, the FCC could get involved in that at some point. They've already held working groups that looked at the Internet of Things and the impact on telephone number. I mean, it sounds kind of, what would you call it? Vanilla, not that interesting necessarily, but a lot of the Internet of Things devices are communicating over the mobile, the mobile networks and the domestic networks. But anyway, a lot of those things that are used for telemetry and whatever else, they're using the network, so they have to be able to. The companies that are distributing, that are using those IoT systems, there has to be money that gets exchanged, right? Because you're using the resources on the network. And how do they identify those devices? Well, historically, it had been those devices had telephone numbers, and it wasn't because you could call the device could call somebody else. It was a billing identity.
Of course.
So that's one of the things that the FCC looked into, because they're responsible for telephone numbers and telephone number exhaust. So the idea of using telephone numbers for non-human entities as a billing issue, has been brought before them. In the work that they've been doing to try and combat illegal robocalls, and which is the area that I've spent, the majority of the last last decade working on, and where digital identity, trust attributes, where that's come to the forefront, was the spoofing of telephone numbers is what brought it forward first, where people were getting telephone numbers that might be representing a bank or the healthcare provider or the Social Security Administration or whoever it might be, and that those were being abused and impersonated. So the work that I did with other folks to try and figure out how to use cryptographic authentication of call signaling information was that first attempt to try and introduce identity into call signaling. Well, when those, I assume whether it's a telephone call or an MCP communication or any communication from agents, where it would cross over into some domain that is being managed by regulators, that's where I think there's going to be an intersection, and there's going to be introspection, looking into what are the concerns that they need to pay attention to, so that the fraud problem doesn't just multiply even more than it already is with generative AI, just as Gotham was mentioning, where, are we listening to Gotham, or is it an avatar? Is it a synthetic identity? Because that's the level of capability that we're already seeing in artificial intelligence systems.
Yeah. Well, yeah, as you've neatly summarized there, the mobile networks are the companies that have had to deal with non-machine identities, whether it's robocalls or whether it's IoT sensors in the middle of a field somewhere. They've had to attach identities to non-human entities. And so they're the ones with the regulatory and the technical experience. And this is the next generation, I would imagine, of those kinds of attacks.
You made me think of something that I wanted to piggyback on that Gotham had said, where he mentioned layered identity and the layers of identity. And that's one of the key challenges that I think exists right now with trying to combat illegal robocalling, is this chain of identities that are associated with a call. A lot of the robocall, and the robocalls aren't a robocall isn't illegal, and it's not even a bad thing. You might, robocalls can happen because of a weather warning, or your drugs are ready at the pharmacist, or whatever it's going to be. But those calls can originate from companies that aren't the companies that are being represented.
Sure.
This is a similar thing to the agent, right? Well, is it an agent from a company that's then being put onto the network by another company? What is the chain of custody? What is the chain of identity, and what is the chain of custody that occurred? And how do you know those identities are trustworthy? So there's there's just a giant amount of information that needs to be able to be understood and processed in very short amount of time if you're making a phone call or a text message or whatever else.
Yeah.
So, and we're far from being in a position to be able to usefully model and encompass all the different kinds of information that might be desirable to have in a real-time communication attempt. So we started with not enough. We know we need to add more, and that's where the work is right now, is trying to understand what is the more that we need and how should that be encoded. And when we talked about authentication, there's more than one authentication method. There's multiple different authentication protocols. There's just a giant amount of work ahead of us. The good thing is asking the questions, understanding that the work is necessary, and then applying resources to get it done.
If I can add, a few things on the challenges for regulation, because that's important that we understand the context we are in, right? So, because these agents are, again, we talked about it earlier, they're not just a piece of code sitting in a hardware, right, where we have full control. What they're doing, this is why we call them agents. They have agency, right? They'll decide what they want to do. So one example is what happened earlier this year in February, what's known as the gibberlink phenomena, where two agents, they figured out that both ends are agents. They say, hey, we both are agents. Why do we need to, talk human language? Let's switch to gibberlink, which is basically using GGWave. So GGWave is a 4-bit audio protocol, which humans don't understand, right? No one coded the agents to do it. The agents negotiated, let's talk in that, right? How do you actually regulate in there? You can regulate what humans are doing, what that code is written. You can pass through some, certification, etc. These agents deciding what they want to do, right? So in that case, if they're talking about something bad about, me or the organization, you don't even know, right? Regulation is next. You don't even know what they're doing, right? The second thing is we talk about, okay, we should have all sorts of audit trails, and then we figure out if something goes wrong and whether it is, following the regulation or not. What if these agents decide, I'm not going to even, allow it to put any audit trail? I'll not even log something. I'll not, I'll use like they use this gibberlink or GGWave, which no human understands, and then they don't even log anything. Then what do we do? So in that case, we need to think regulation in a completely different context. This is not just a piece of code sitting in a hardware. These things, if you can call them things, they have agency. They decide what to do, right? So all the regulation that we have created, similar to authentication, assuming there is a human always. But here, it's not just human. It's representing human, but acting human-like. So we need to actually probably evolve the way we create regulations as well. And again, I don't know. We have all the answers or even all the questions at the moment. What questions to ask? What do we protect? And this is why I use this term ethical firewall. Every single agent should have an ethical firewall. While we are training the models and all the 5 M's, we need to implement ethical firewall in every single of those components. Is that the only solution? The final solution? Of course not, because we don't know what questions to ask right now. But we need to think regulation in a completely different way than what we have been doing in any of the previous world, whether it is IoT or the traditional digital service, telecom, and so on.
Okay, well, look, we've nearly come up to an hour now, so I think we need to wrap this up. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Gotham, is in our prep calls for this, we talked about authentication. We've talked about that a lot so far. You also talked about authorization and how that is perhaps under discussed. Can you just briefly give us your thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tim, for highlighting that. I think we need to talk a lot about authorization now in this agentic AI world, or Internet of Agents, as we call it, right? Authorization was always there in the digital space, but was a second-rate citizen, right? We always focused on authentication for right reasons, because authentication is a challenge. Authorization is a request. So authentication is challenging me to prove that I am Gotham through Gotham's password, through scanning Gotham's face, or returning back the OTP which was delivered to Gotham's phone or Gotham's email ID. That was authentication. It's a challenge, and you need to succeed that challenge to get authenticated. Authorization happens after authentication. Authorization is a request saying that, hey, do you allow this data to go out? So my smart meter, for example, should ideally ask me to authorize that the data generated by that smart meter should go to the utility provider or not. That's authorization, right? Even in the, let's say, M2M world, in the IoT world, it's not difficult. You can code it. In that agentic world, if we need to at least put humans in the loop, which means if it is my agent, personal AI agent, Pi, for example, or if it is the organization's enterprise agent sitting there, in that case, to put the humans in the loop or the legal entity in the loop, the authorization becomes extremely important, because authentication, humans in the loop, doesn't make sense because the humans are not there in the loop, right? But if the agent is taking a decision, creating a sub goal, making some action, like deciding on, hey, let's switch to Gibberlink, or let's create a sub goal to, I don't know, defraud someone because I have been asked to make money. But for every single such actions, whether it is decisions, creating sub goal, or taking some actions, it needs to get authorization from a human or a legal entity, right? This is something that we should put as the highest focus for this agentic AI, I think. And then we have some solutions in there, and we can reuse some of the solutions that we always had for authorization within the, let's say, non-agentic AI world, whatever they were.
Well, I mean, I suppose the challenge there is to balance the need for authorization with the user experience, because in writing the paper, I was reading about so ChatGPT has an agent which is basically it's inside a browser, and so you tell it to do something, it does it all inside the browser, but it quite often asks you, am I okay to do this? And the reviewer described it as the neediest intern in the world. And he is like this kind of, people describe agents as interns, but this one was constantly asking, is this okay? Is this okay? So, there is a very difficult balance to strike there between making sure agents don't go off and do things that you don't want it to do, but also not constantly pinging you saying, am I okay to do this? So these are some of the practical problems that I'm sure we'll have to negotiate as this market grows. But anyway, we could talk for another hour. It's been fascinating. Pierce and Gotham, thank you so much for all your insights.
Thank you.
Please look out for the MEF paper, which is going to be published in a week or two. Gotham, you've written your book. Where can we read your book?
Thank you, Tim. It's in Amazon Kindle store. It's called The Internet of Agents, where I have tried to ask the questions that we should all be asking. And again, as I was saying, I don't think any of us has all the questions asked, right? Yeah. But it's a discussion that we need to start, and that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing now. So once again, Pierce, Gotham, thank you so much for your comments, and thank you everyone out there for watching. We'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye.